Good morning and welcome. You're watching Republic TV. I'm Nupur Talwar Suri, and joining me from our Delhi studios is Shavan Sen. Shavan, good morning. The question on everybody's mind this morning, of course, Shavan, is that is an attack by Russia imminent, or is there still perhaps a way through diplomacy out of this?
Well, in fact, good morning, Nupur, and to all our viewers who are tuning in right now. Why this is becoming extremely crucial at this point in time, and why is it that we at Republic, we've also upped our coverage of what's really happening between Ukraine and Russia. The next 48 hours, viewers, are going to be extremely crucial. Are we really looking at an imminent invasion of Ukraine by Russia? The fact of the matter is that United States intelligence reports have already suggested that this could happen within just a week. In fact, why we are saying that the 48 hours are going to be extremely crucial is because the long-standing demand of Ukraine perhaps could be dropped. Ukraine's ambassador to UK has already suggested that perhaps this long-term wish of Ukraine to be part of NATO could be dropped so that they could bring Russia on the table. Now that's going to be very, very crucial, because remember, one of the primary reasons why we are seeing this increased tension between Ukraine and Russia is that Russia has always said that Ukraine shouldn't be part of NATO. If Ukraine now drops that demand, perhaps things could really change. But will that really happen? United Kingdom as well as the United States have already indicated that while on the one hand, Russia is indicating that they are not going to go ahead with the invasion, but on the ground, things are very, very different. So what we are going to do right now for you viewers is to try and help you understand why this is becoming another major global story which we're tracking very, very closely. Satellite imagery that has been obtained by Republic Media Network only indicates that there has been a massive buildup by Russia. You're looking at 150,000 soldiers who have now been placed along the Ukraine border. 3 borders, viewers, which has now been surrounded by the Russian troops. You've had a long-standing ally of Russia, Belarus, where we are being told that there has been a massive deployment on the grounds, or rather on the pretext of a drill that is supposed to be carried out. You're looking at about 50,000 troops that have been massed at the Belarus-Ukraine border. So the timing of the Russian invasion remains a key question. Prime Minister of Ukraine has already addressed the nation. He's urged his people to maintain the trust of the state and the army. Effectively, he sends across a message to remain calm and not fall prey to any misinformation. Here's what he said, and then we'll also bring in our experts to try and help you understand what's really happening on the ground.
Fears over possible invasion by Ukraine have gripped the West. But Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal has urged his citizens to avoid panic.
Війна, яка ведеться проти нас, це не лише солдати і зброя. Вона також має багато вимірів. Газова криза в Європі, розхитування курсу гривні, кібератаки на урядові ресурси, масові псевдомінування об'єктів інфраструктури, проплачені мітинги і псевдомітинги. Це все елементи гібридної війни. І найстрашніший з них – дезінформація з нагнітанням паніки.
With war of words raging between Kremlin and US and its allies, and social media filled with speculations, the Ukrainian Prime Minister said misinformation is the biggest enemy.
Ми живемо в світі швидкого поширення інформації, коли панічні настрої для ворога є подарунком. Саме паніка краще за танки та автомати знищує держави. Це не 2014 рік, а 2022. Наша армія сильна, наша позиція на міжнародній арені сильна. Мы сегодня экономично сильны.
За Киев я не знаю, но если эвакуируют, я так думаю, значит, для чего-то они делают, для чего-то они боятся. Мы, например, в Северодонецке не боимся, ничего не боимся, потому что у нас тишина и спокойствие. Бояться нечего, магазины работают, тишина у нас. Ну, для меня хорошо.
Response from Ukrainian citizens are mixed.
Я думаю, не будет войны. Это все на уровне политики, это деньги, политика, как бы ничего больше. Как говорят, война – это самый лучший бизнес из всех, которые существуют.
Єдине, що сьогодні дійсно нам потрібно, не піддаватись на гібридні провокації ворога та на дезінформацію. Наша армія готова, наша армія сильна, наша армія мужня. Такими маємо бути і ми. Наші солдати мають відчути, що за ними теж стоїть сила, сильний духом, мудрий, єдиний український народ. Довіряйте своїй державі, довіряйте своїй армії, вірте в Україну.
Ukraine has been trying to avoid panic, sometimes writing off any severe threats from Russia, unlike the claims of the West. However, the country is on the defensive with military backing from global powers. Bureau Report, Republic TV.
Let me also bring in my colleague and our senior executive editor Abhishek Kapoor, who's been tracking the story very closely. Abhishek, next 48 hours are going to be extremely crucial. Ukraine's ambassador to United Kingdom has already indicated that there is a high possibility that they are going to drop the demand of being part of NATO if only Russia comes on the table. So this is yet another attempt that has been made by Ukraine to at least bring Russia on the negotiating table.
Well, Shawan, some sort of talks have been on the Normandy format talks between Western Europe countries and particularly France and Germany and Russia have happened over the last couple of months. But I think there has been no breakthrough. Remember, just day before yesterday, there was an hour-long call between President Joe Biden and President Putin. But then the stalemate continues. There has been amassing of troops on the Russian side. There has been scrambling of resources, war ammunition on the Ukrainian side by its Western allies, led by the United States and NATO essentially. But then what is important is that Russia, when it says that please stop NATO expansion further east, please do not bring NATO war machinery closer to the borders of Russia, I think they have a point. Kiev happened to be, in earlier times called the mother of all Russian cities. And now we have a situation where the traditional Cold War is playing out and Ukrainian establishment as of now seems to be party to it. So I think the situation is tense. The next 48 hours are crucial. If the Ukrainian ambassador has made that conciliatory statement that Ukraine would consider or reconsider its membership of NATO if it brings Russia on the table, I think it would be good for both the sides. We have seen saber rattling happening on both the sides of the divide. It's not just the Russians who have amassed troops. Ukraine, for example, has weapons and ammunition to the tune of about 1,500 tons supplied and parked there. We have the classic case of Romania, which has missile batteries of NATO now targeted on the Russian borders. So it's not about it's not just about Ukraine wanting to identify more closely with the West, Shawan. Ultimately, it's about NATO expansion. It's about Warsaw Pact countries by and by getting into the Western influence, and that has got the Russians very uncomfortable. That has got Putin very uncomfortable. I recall, for example, his Munich Security Dialogue speech of 2007, where he said that the West should not be expanding towards East. 2008, we saw how some parts of Georgia were taken. Then 2014, we saw Crimea operation. So I think Putin, the strong leader that he is for the Russians, he would obviously be looking at some kind of face saver. And if this statement of the Ukrainian ambassador to UK gives that window, I think both sides should really take it up, Shawan.
Right, Abhishek, I had a question actually. I just wanted to ask you about whether, the Minsk agreements could be a way out, because a lot of emphasis is again being placed on those, and there are renewed negotiations on that. Do you think that perhaps that could be the diplomatic solution that people are looking at now? Abhishek? If you can hear me, I was asking you about the Minsk agreements, now that is something that a lot of diplomatic push is being placed on. There are hopes perhaps of a revival of that agreement, even though, there have been allegations from both sides. All right, I don't think Abhishek can hear us yet, and we're going to try and reconnect that audio connection with him. Abhishek, there is, of course, a package deal that was negotiated in 2014 and 15, known as the Minsk agreements. Now, there is a lot of emphasis perhaps being placed by world leaders that that could be the way out. Now, in your assessment, is that something that could bring some sort of a solution to the table for now at least?
Well, if the two sides really want Nupur, frameworks, agreements exist. The Minsk agreement is one, the Normandy format talks is another, and the overall dynamics of the United Nations, of the European Union, many platforms available really if the two sides want to do it. I think what is important is that there should be a clear attempt made at not raising the temperatures further, pullback of war machinery on both the sides. Remember, generally in international media, you would hear about the Russians having amassed troops of about 100,000 or more on their side of the border with Ukraine. But then even the Ukrainians have mobilized their machinery. The US has sent its about 6,000 troops, not on the Ukrainian soil, but in neighboring countries to take care of any military exigency. About a dozen odd nations have issued advisories to let their citizens go out of Ukraine. I think the saving grace is the Ukrainian President Zelensky has been conciliatory. He has not been raising tempers further. So it's not that all hope is lost and that war is imminent, but then some trigger-happy person shooting from the hip somewhere can really lead to a situation where we might end up on an escalatory ladder. So I think that's something which has to be avoided. But what is important is intense diplomacy is going on. I mentioned about the phone call between President Putin and President Joe Biden, which took place day before yesterday. That was their third call on this particular crisis. And then we have had a call between the Russian defense minister and his UK counterpart. We have had a call between President Biden and President Zelensky of Ukraine. So a lot of two-way and three-way talks happening. Leaders are still trying to sort of keep the situation under control. But as I said, what happens on the ground if someone really decides to take things in their hand. And ultimately, of course, it's about Putin. Remember, the world is watching a leader who is very strong, who has this self-perception of being a very strong leader. And he can't be seen to be pulling back after having mobilized the troops, after having made his intentions clear that NATO expansion further east has to stop at any cost. If the Ukrainians are willing to work on that, I think we could still avert a crisis. But then remember, Bay of Pigs, 1962, the Russians having sent nuclear-tipped missiles in the Bay of Pigs in defense of Cuba. And this situation is no different, I can tell you that, from the Bay of Pigs crisis of 1962. At that time, intense diplomacy prevailed. John F. Kennedy was the U.S. president. I believe Brezhnev was on the Khrushchev was on the Russian side. The erstwhile USSR. Similar situation is playing out, where this time it's the Americans who are on the borders of Russia, and Russia wants them back. So I think that is the crux of the entire crisis, that Russia does not want further expansion of NATO towards east. We have seen what has happened with former Warsaw countries like Romania, which is now essentially a NATO war ammunition dump. I mean, there are missile batteries of North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Some would say, once the Cold War was over and the USSR really disintegrated, what was the need of continuing with NATO? Remember, President Trump actually, of all would be talking about that. In fact, he was on record saying that NATO should be disbanded because other countries are not taking care of expenses. This time, of course, things are different. The Democrats are in power in the United States. They take their cross-Atlantic relationships very seriously, and that's why we have seen building up of this Ukrainian crisis, obviously, at a greater scale post the coming of Democrats in Washington, D.C. So I think intense diplomacy on, and it is hoped that those talks succeed, be it the Normandy format talks or under some framework brought out through the Minsk agreement.
Well, in fact, Abhishek, the latest that we are also picking up is the fact that there is a high possibility of a false flag operation to be conducted by Russia, because as what the US intelligence have been suggesting right now, that all that Russia needs right now is some sort of a provocation, a reason why they would carry out the invasion. In fact, as far as the latest satellite imagery is concerned, the Yelna base of Russia has largely been emptied. Over 700 tanks, infantry fighting vehicles and ballistic missile launchers have already been moved out. So, while on the one hand we're talking about whether at all diplomacy is going to work in the next 48 hours, will Ukraine and Russia sit on the negotiating table? All that becomes extremely crucial. But what role does the United States of America really have? While you've had the Ukrainian president already inviting President Joe Biden to come to Kyiv, so that sends out a very strong message of support of the United States to the Ukrainian administration. But it's very unlikely that that is going to happen, given the fact that you've already had some sort of a drawdown taking place of the US embassy officials. The Biden administration essentially believes Russia is likely to undertake the military action against Ukraine just before the conclusion of the Olympic Games, following a massive build-out of Russian ground and naval forces begun in the fall. So is it an invasion imminent? Let's take a look.
We are here now in Odessa, Ukraine, and lately we have been receiving very disturbing messages about possible Russian attacks. The general opinion of the people here is that they are really tired of these informational attacks, because the war is going on for 8 years and people are ready for anything, actually. So they're just trying to live their lives, they're trying to get by, they're just doing their routine. We are now walking on the street of Marselska, and the situation here is really calm. There is no panic, there is no panic buying, there is a lot of food in the supermarkets. So people just trying to actually live their life. This was Sergei Panishuk from Odessa, Ukraine, exclusively for Republica Television.